Hi friends, welcome to practice. So this is a short instructional video in which I will be describing the pose downward facing dog, also known as Adho Mukha Svanasana in Sanskrit. So if you've taken any flow style of classes, whether it's slow flow or a more Vinyasa flow style of class, you probably have done downward facing dog, but rarely is this pose actually broken down in classes. So sometimes we don't really know what we should be feeling. And everyone's going to feel something a little bit different in every pose because we all have a unique body type. But there are specific things that you want to feel and start to find these actions in the correct muscles of the body. That way we're not overstretching or overworking another part of the body. So we're going to start by coming into a tabletop position. Make your way onto hands and knees on all fours. Stack your shoulders over your wrists. Stack your hips over your knees. Gently start to fan out your fingers. And then bring your thumbs just a little bit closer in so you're not overstretching the thumb and index finger. So I spread my fingers, but then bring the thumbs in just a little bit more. And now let's just start with some cat-cows. As you inhale, arch your spine, draw the heart forward and up. Exhale, reverse, round the spine. Try your best to keep your arms straight so the movement's really in the upper back. Again, inhale, arch, curl your tailbone up towards the ceiling. You're in a back bend. Exhale, reverse, lengthen your tailbone to your heels. You're in a position of flexion. Your spine is rounded. Do that one more time. Inhale, arch. And exhale, reverse. And now make your way back towards center in your tabletop. So you want to feel that your rib cage is lifting away from the floor, but we're not tucking the tailbone under. Instead, there's this trench shape at the low back, and that's the natural curve of your spine. And now in your tabletop, press into your thumb and index finger, that inner part of your hand. Keep that part of your hand down and spin your inner arms and inner shoulders forward towards the top of your mat. Squeeze your outer upper arms back and in. So now I'll show you from the front. Oftentimes what happens is when we spin our inner arms forward and squeeze our outer arms back and in, so that's biceps spinning forward, triceps wrapping back, the inner part of the hand, the thumb and index finger lifts off the ground. In downward facing dog, you have to do both. Press down through this inner padding of your hand, thumb and index finger, but then rather than letting the elbows splay out to the side, wrap your triceps back and in. And I don't always like to teach, actually I rarely ever teach saying the eye of the elbow pointing forward because that's not the case for everyone. Most people's inner elbows will not face completely forward. And that's also not what we're actually trying to engage. We're not engaging the elbows. It's the triceps wrapping back. So these are the arm actions in downward facing dog. Now, to create the right length for your down dog, from your tabletop, walk your hands forward a big 2 to 3 inches. This is something you'll hear me say almost every time we come to down dog from tabletop. Hands must be 2 or 3 inches ahead of the shoulders, otherwise your down dog will be too short. Now tuck your toes under. Make sure your feet are about hip bone apart. Lift your knees, lift your hips, press your hips up and back, downward facing. So do check in that your feet are hip bone apart. Your inner heels are hidden behind you, meaning that your feet are parallel. And now bend your knees. And with your knees bent, see if you can press into your entire hand, every knuckle, every fingertip, and send your hips high up towards the ceiling behind you. Get longer from the fingers to the shoulders to the hips. Then ask yourself if you can straighten your legs. Can you make your heels a little heavier? If you feel that your low back rounds, almost like that cat pose, it probably means there's some tightness or shortness in your hamstrings. In that case, you want to keep a bend in your knees. Very few people have the length in their hamstrings that they can straighten their legs and bring their heels to the ground completely. Take another breath in here. Exhale, drop to your knees. Point your toes and sit back on your heels. So in downward facing dog, we never have to straighten the legs. You don't ever have to straighten your legs in down dog, but we are working on straightening the arms and finding those arm actions. So bring your arms out in front of you, arms shoulder width apart. or hands shoulder width apart. Spin your inner arms forward and up, and squeeze your outer arms down and in. And when you do that, you might even look at your hands and feel how your thumbs curl up towards the ceiling. So imagine you were in down dog. Can you keep your thumbs down and also find those arm actions? It's hard, but that's the whole point because we're engaging these muscles in the upper arms. So come back to your tabletop. Start with your shoulders over your wrist, hips over your knees, and then walk your hands forward a big 2 to 3 inches. Hands shoulder width apart, wrist creases parallel to the top edge of your mat. So make sure that the creases of your wrist are parallel to this top edge of your mat. And then look at your fingers and notice which finger is pointing forward for you. So for most of us, it's usually either the index finger, the middle finger, or somewhere in between. I know for me, it's kind of right in between the index and middle finger. And once you figure that out, that's which finger you always want facing forward for down dog or plank pose. Oftentimes I see people's hands turned in. When your hands are turned in too much, your shoulders start to turn in an internal rotation, which is not a healthy position for the shoulders. So wrist creases parallel to the top edge of your mat is going to allow for this action of external rotation of the shoulders. Overall, your arms are in a neutral position. I won't get into all the little details, but we're trying to find the actions of external rotations. So one other way to come back to downward facing dog is from an extended child's pose. Extended child's pose is a little more active than a regular child's pose. Bring your big toes to touch and separate your knees just to about shoulder width apart, no wider, so that when you melt your hips back towards your heels, you're actually resting your rib cage on your thighs, not in between. And then walk your hands as far forward as you can. You can relax the head for a moment and just take a couple breaths here. Every exhale, feel the hips and pelvis ground down towards your heels. Every inhale, walk your hands further a little bit more. Start to inch your hands so far forward that your forearms and elbows lift off the mat. And now keeping this distance between your hands and your knees, inhale, lift your hips, and you should be in a tabletop with your hands quite ahead of your shoulders. Make sure hands are shoulder width apart, if not adjust. Make sure your wrist creases are parallel to the top of your mat. Press into your inner hand, thumb, and index finger. Spin your inner arms forward as you squeeze your outer arms back and in. Inhale, tuck your toes under. Exhale, downward facing dog. Glance back at your feet. Make sure they're hip width apart and parallel, inner heels hidden behind you. If you feel your low back rounding, bend your knees so you can send your hips higher. Relax the head and neck. Ground through inner hand, thumb and index finger. Spin the biceps, the inner arms and inner shoulders forward. Wrap the triceps, the outer upper arms back and in. Take a deep breath in, deep breath out. And now inhale, rock forward, come to your plank pose. Catch your hips shoulder height. Oftentimes, plank pose is a good length for your down dog. So if you're ever not sure if your down dog is too long or too short, you can come to this plank, shoulders over the wrist, plugging into the ground with the big toe mounds. Press back to downward facing dog, and that's usually about a good length. You may only need to adjust your feet like half an inch or so. Drop to your knees. Sit back on your heels. So I know there's a lot of details in down dog. One other thing I want to discuss is there's usually 2 different body types. Oftentimes there's the tighter bodies, and their down dog might look something like this, more rounded. And so what helps is bending the knees, pressing the chest to the thighs, and then sending the hips higher. The second body type is the more bendy, more mobile body. Their down dog, maybe this is yours, could look something more like this. Now you can see my head is much lower than my arms, and I'm sinking through my arms and shoulders. In general, your upper arms should frame your ears in down dog. If your head is lower, but it's relaxed. So don't tuck the chin to the chest, just relax the head in down dog. You can gaze somewhere back at your feet. Then it's not because you need to fix your head. That's not going to correct that problem or engage the correct muscles. You need to press into your fingertips. Lift your forearms and armpits forward in space. And you can see automatically now my upper arms frame my ears. So oftentimes, it's the bendy bodies that are collapsing into their flexibility. So we want to bring more stability to the down dog. The tighter bodies need to bend their knees so they can create more space and lengthen down dog. So I know that was a lot of detail just for one pose. Don't overthink it. Play with these actions in the arms, the hands, see how it feels. You could even take a picture of yourself, see what it looks like, and your down dog will change over time. That's the exciting part. So let me know how this goes for you. And that is all for today. Namaste.